Right, we're going back to number 10, and we have David coming up and Kevin staying. So welcome.
Yes.
Thank you, Christine. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, look, a short introduction because you won't have met David Gurney before. So, always reticent to say he's the new Jenny, but if you remember Jenny Lifshitz, who left us a while ago to DIA, David has come along. So he is the manager of the corporate and local board performance. So he produces, rather than the statutory side, you've seen Christine producing. David looks after the performance of the entity across the group. So yeah, well, there's again another short, even slightly shorter presentation. So we'll definitely leave time for questions, but I'll hand over to David just to run that through.
Sure. So I've got a very short presentation to run through. No, we need to move on to the next.
Yeah. Oh, the group. Yeah, we've got the. Oh, the other presentation. Sorry.
Yeah, so pretty much what I'll run through is just the parent results. I'll highlight achievements, just a few of the high-level achievements that we've made over the last quarter. I'll run through some performance measures, particularly the ones that are causing us a little bit of concern. Briefly look over the financial performance and then look at how staff numbers are tracking. So just in terms of achievements, I've just highlighted some of the I guess the things that we've completed over the last quarter. There's a more detailed list, of course, in the report, but I've pulled out things like in the Auckland development theme, the opening of the Alan Melville Centre, just off Freiburg Square and High Street. The unitary plan, a lot of the appeals are now being resolved through the High Court and through Environment Court appeals. We completed the tunnel construction for the Artillery Drive stormwater project. So that's a 1.1 kilometre long stormwater tunnel which will reduce the flooding risk in Takanini and also help free up land in the special housing area in Takanini, so that's quite a big project. Regulatory services, later on we'll talk about some of the performance measures in the regulatory services space. We have a new structure in place, so some of those performance concerns that you'll see highlighted hopefully will be resolved by the new structure that will be in place. In the Parks, Community and Lifestyle area, we've launched a new campaign, Start It, Move It, which is promoting active recreation in our recreation centres and swimming pools. And also we started the new website for Auckland Libraries, which is one of the first steps in the new library strategy over the next 10 years. So those are just some of the high-level achievements that come through in the report. In terms of the performance measures, so we measure LTP performance measures in our quarterly reports. And of course, not all LTP measures are measured on a quarterly basis. So for this report, we're reporting against 37 measures out of the total set of about 140. These are the measures that can be measured kind of on a quarterly basis as opposed to a half-yearly or annual basis. Of those, 19 reached target and 18 did not. Some of those targets that were not met, basically these measures are 3 years old, and so in some cases just the activities that we do now don't really match kind of the way we measure. So that will be picked up in a review of performance measures we're doing as part of this next LTP. But I guess in 3 areas there were performance measures that are causing a little bit of concern. So the first is building and resource consents, especially the processing times, which are behind target. So in the building consents area, 89% of applications are processed within 20 working days against a target of 100%. And in the resource consents area, we're now processing 74% of non-notified consents against a target of 100%. So some of those processing times are affected by, we've transitioned to new systems, IT systems, but also with the restructure as well, that is proving some impediment to some of those processing times. Noise control contractors, we have some performance issues with them, so that's coming through in our performance result around noise complaints responded to within 30 minutes for urban areas or 60 minutes for rural areas. Currently, 65% of complaints are responded to within those timeframes against a target of 80%. We've raised those issues with the contractors, and there is a sanction in place on their fees, so we're applying a 3% sanction against their fees. And those contracts come up for renewal next year, and some of the underperformance that we're currently experiencing will be part of those negotiations. So we are kind of responding to that lack of performance. And the other area I picked out was just the Kauri areas actively managed to prevent dieback. So that's under target as well. 63% of Kauri areas are actively managed against a target of 70%. But I know that just, I think last week there was a decision to go out on consultation around the LTP, around increasing funding to increase the amount of areas that we can kind of manage. So that's, again, it's been responded to as well. Just moving very quickly into financial performance. So it was picked up before with the group report that operating revenue has been impacted by a decrease in volumes in building consents and resource consents, so that's having an impact on revenue. There's a variance showing of $10 million. Operating expenditure, that is down, a favourable variance. It's due to staff vacancies following some restructuring, again, in regulatory services and community services, as well as interest costs generally being lower than budgeted due to lower interest rates and also a lower level of debt. And some repairs and maintenance work also kind of running a little bit behind the phasing in the budget, so that's giving us the operating expenditure favourable variance. And you'll see that the CRL is also impacting below the line in terms of net non-operating revenue. So Kevin, do you want to any comments there?
Look, no, it's really just what we've discussed here. That's just showing that, yeah, non-operational, it's impacted on the operational results there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And the last graph I just want to run through is the FTE numbers. So we've compared the current, or the level as at 30th of September 2017 with the end of year position last year and the year before. It's just to confirm that those numbers are kind of holding steady. It's quite often hard sometimes to get a real accurate feel for this because, of course, we have 14% turnover, so there's always a bit of churn there. And also there will be the impact of vacancies following the restructures. But I guess one of the key stats we use is the FTE per 1,000 residents, and as you'll see, generally that is coming down over time, mainly because we're holding FTE numbers steady, and of course Auckland population's growing as well, so that's a key metric we look to. But that's the presentation.
So, yeah, look, happy to take questions. And we have Penny Pratt has made herself available if there's any in the regulatory area, and we have some other staff if there's specific questions. But
Penny, do you want to come up? There probably will be some questions about consent, so have a little roll call here. Councillor Cooper first. Right, Councillor Cooper.
Shall I go? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I do have concerns about our performance in the regulatory area, and not because our staff aren't doing their very, very best to try and reach these targets. But as you can see, revenue's down as well, but the restructures really affected issues. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was the noise control, and the Regulatory Committee have recently adopted a high harm approach. So in terms of some of our responses, for example, around noise complaints, only I think it's about 60% are upheld when our contracted staff go out, and we are going to change the way we approach some of this. So I guess my question is, have we already embedded that kind of approach into that contract, or is that where we might see some changes around, the perceived non-performance in that area? Because we're going to put in some more over-the-phone kind of management of that. Will that change, do you think, in kind of producing better response levels?
So I think the answer to that is twofold. One, as David said, the measures that we're currently reporting against are 3 years old, and we are developing new measures for the LTP that we will be bringing forward to get sign-off from the committee, and they will reflect better the approach that the regulatory committee has decided to take. Equally, we are having conversations with the noise contractors at the moment.
Yeah, I do that. And I guess the other thing for me is that this is a constant cry or complaint by our customers about resource and building consents, but you know, to me, a lot of the issues are around if we make cuts, we have to get it right. We have to make sure we're cutting in the right places. And also, I think the other issues we've got to be really aware of here, from my point of view, is attracting people. We just can't seem to attract people and keep them here. And so that comes down to, I guess, our staff satisfaction, but also places to live and the level of remuneration that we give as compared to other areas. So I guess that's a question, but it's also a comment for expediency's sake, Mr. Chairman.
I am allowing comments with questions, but if we have water gear behind us, so Penny.
Can I just, probably I do need to clarify things. The Future Shape restructure did not lead to a large number of staff leaving. No. So we need to be very clear on that. The issue we're facing around the timeframes that we're not meeting in either building consents and resource consents would be there whether we had restructured or not. So we're in a situation where there's a number of things that have come together to cause this, and we're actively working to fix those things. So one is that we are holding vacancy rates, and we would have those vacancy rates whether we'd restructured or not, because it's symptomatic of a boom time in the building industry. We lose staff to private entities because there's a demand for skilled staff in those areas. The second issue is that while we're seeing a decline in building consents and resource consents, we're seeing an increase in more complex consents. So instead of the single house, we are now dealing with multi-storey apartment buildings. One of the challenges we have there is that the Building Act does not provide for those, and so every application over 3 storeys in the building consent area requires a bespoke way of dealing with it, and that's an issue we've raised with MB about going forward into the future. And the third area that we have been working with is some integration issues with systems, but also some duplication of processes that we need to remove to make sure that we can be more effective in what we're doing. So we've got things in place to address those issues, but I really wouldn't want the message going from this committee that it's the restructure that has caused this, because the reality is, you know, we have the restructure has set ourselves up to actually deliver a better outcome, and we lost very few staff through that process.
And given we're crying out for apartment, you know, and high-rise developments, it's not a problem. Well, it's a problem we want to solve, but it's symptomatic of perhaps a movement of where we want to head, which is greater intensification. Mayor Goff. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's addressed to Penny as well, and I think she's partly answered it, but I'm kind of curious about a couple of things. Curious, maybe the wrong word. The fact that we've got 100 vacancies, that really jumped out at me. Are we making progress in filling those, or are we still going backwards?
Okay, so in terms of the biggest vacancy area we have is in resource consents, and we've just done a recruitment drive in the last month, and Ian and his team have been undertaking interviews. We probably don't believe that we will fill all those vacancies, and it's just because of the tight market out there, and all councils around New Zealand are facing that cause. We will then have to make a decision about outsourcing and housing model and get a much tighter look at that going forward. Yep.
Just looking at that specific issue, recruitment drive, is it because we're not paying enough? Is it simply because there's so much demand? Are we looking internationally? If we outsource, who do we outsource to? Are there other city councils with spare capacity, or where do we find these people? Because, you know, with that level of vacancy, that must be producing big problems for you.
So in terms of in the resource consenting space, that is very much indicative of a shortage of intermediate and senior planners across New Zealand, and I think it would be fair to say that in the planning profession, what you do tend to find is planners don't necessarily stay being planners. They go to a range of different careers, so that's a challenge for everybody working in the resource consenting space. We have looked overseas in the past, and we have done recruitment drives in the UK. That in itself brings some challenges because we're dealing with people who don't know the resource management system, but I know, and Ian probably can comment, we did get quite a number about a year ago that came over.
Yeah, so approximately a year ago we would have received about 10 to 15 planners from the United Kingdom. At the moment, the recruitment round that we're doing is, as Penny alluded to, there's not much of a resource in the intermediate senior area, so we will be getting about, I suspect, 15 to 20 graduates come January. But the trouble with that is obviously it takes a bit of time for them to come up to speed to be truly efficient.
In the building consent space, we did go to Canada, and we have had a number of Canadian inspectors and building processors come on board, and they're now fully up to speed with the legislation. We have in the past used Wellington City Council, Porirua, and another council in the South Island. They're all at capacity, and so they don't do as much, and we obviously do have we have a couple of third-party private entities that do the processing work for us as well. Professional building services in the south would be the biggest one. But one of our issues that we had to deal with this year is one of those private suppliers actually closed their doors, and we were not able to secure all of their staff. They were snapped up by private companies in other areas, and so we ended up with all of their consents, but only just on half of their staff. So that just sort of added a bit to the current situation. But yeah, we're working our way through it, and I don't think it's so much about the salaries, it's about some of the other challenges and lifestyle opportunities that are provided by other places in New Zealand.
Yeah. Just further to that, through you, Mr. Chair, what's quite surprising, I guess, is the quite major fall-off in resource consent applications, comparing this quarter with the same period last year, down by about 1,500, which is about 16% lower. Is that taking the pressure off, and two, why is it happening? And in building consents, even building consents are 4 or 5% lower, which is quite alarming when you think that the population's still going up, but the building consents are going down. So I just wanted some comment around that.
So in terms of resource consents, if you remember last year, that was when the unitary plan was finally made operative, and we did have a bit of a spike of people lodging applications before it actually took effect. The unitary plan is designed that people, and for some activities, no longer have to go for a resource consent, so that, you know, we probably didn't expect to see a steady increase after the unitary plan. There was a bit of a blip. That's our perception of what's happening, but we can't be absolutely certain. In the building space, we did have a downturn at the beginning of the year. Anecdotally, some of that's to do with the capacity of the building industry, because building consents only have a currency of 2 years. You have to give effect to them within 2 years. or you have to apply again. And I think what we're finding is some of the building industry are just focusing on what they can do rather than too much in the further. But we are seeing that to increase, and I suppose one of the challenges which we are very much aware of is Kiwi Build and the potential for 5,000 more houses a year in Auckland. How do we manage that, and what are the things we need to put in place to make that effective and efficient?
Thank you. Mr Chairman, my last question, just taking on board what Penny's just said, that we're going to have to think about how we cope with Kiwi Build, and you've communicated to me about that. Some of the satisfaction ratings will reflect the pressure that you're under and the slowness, but we can probably anticipate, can't we, that this will get worse with the bedding in of the new computer systems and getting the current problems sorted out. I just wondered whether you could maybe give all of us an idea of whether we're getting on top of that problem and whether we'll be able to clear that backlog by Christmas as hoped for.
And so the Mayor's talking specifically about the code compliance certificate issue that we made a bit of a press release about a few weeks ago. We're throwing everything at it. We've brought on the 2018 graduates who weren't due to start until February next year. They've come on board to release some of our technical staff to actually focus on the CCC issue. We are gradually clawing our way back. When we first released the issue, we were only doing about 70%, I think it was about 68, 69% within statutory timeframes. We are now back to 75, 76, and we're making good progress. And that is through a number of things about shifting staff around. Staff are doing overtime, and I need to keep an eye on that because it's been a long year, and we just need to make sure that they manage their wellness. But yes, we are hopeful that we will get rid of the over 20 days by the end of this year. As part of that, as I've said, we are working closely with IS on the integration issues and also on that process review to make sure that we are doing everything as effectively and efficiently as possible and removing double ups and process, etc.
Okay. And you're confident you're tackling the systemic problem, or is it too early to tell?
Oh, I think, well, apart from the problem of vacancies, which we're doing our best, and also, as I've advised before, the problems with the Building Act itself, we're doing what we can to address the issues that we have control over.
Thank you.
Right, we have three more speakers, so appreciate if Councillor Simpson, Philippian and Wayne Walker could just keep it tight as possible, because we have Ravina, Margaret and Brian here. So we are first up.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. You really should stop putting me after the Mayor, but that will make my questions much shorter. I suppose I'm really concerned when I read this report. I think performance as a council is pretty much what the ratepayers of Auckland judge us by, and to have pretty much 50% of those targets not meeting, those measures not meeting target, I don't think is a very good place to be. So I'm going to leave the consenting stuff because I think, Your Worship, you've handled that really well, and I'm happy with the answers. But I just want one further question on consenting. So, Penny, when you say you're going to get on top of the 20 days by the end of the year, you mean the end of this calendar year, which is 6 months through this financial year? Is that correct?
So what we're committed to doing is in the CCC issue. So this is the Code of Compliance issue. We are working to remove the backlog of over 20 work statutory days by the end of this calendar year.
Okay. I suppose my second sort of big problem around is the Building Act. Look, we knew via the unitary plan that life was going to be different. We're not building houses. We are building terraced house. We're not building houses as we knew it. We're building a different style of home. So, I think we need to put a real push through that, so that doesn't make life too difficult. Surely, every council, but us in particular, needs to be. We should have seen that coming, and what have we done to sort of help up to there? And my last question, which is almost the most important for me, is, you talk about these targets being 3 years old. We had an annual plan that we played around with some different information. Why weren't these targets upgraded then? Because what's going to happen is we're going to end up with the end of year results for this council, new council, underperforming, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't like that. I don't want it to be in that place. So I am concerned that we've set targets that are so far either out of date or don't meet currently where we're at, that it's setting ourselves up for a failure. And I don't understand how we've got into that place. So some answers around those, please.
In terms of what we've been doing about the Building Act, I think it would be fair to say that this council has been consistently raising with the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment the issues with the Building Act for well over 3 years. It's not a new thing. Medium density high-rise apartments are not a new phenomena in Auckland. They might be in other parts of New Zealand, but they definitely have been around for quite some time. We've consistently been raising the problems that we have, that the Building Act does not recognise medium density housing and requires individual sign-off of facades and things over 3 years. So it's not for the want of trying. And Dean and myself have met regularly with senior officers from that department. The mayoral task force, housing task force, reiterated it as a big issue facing Auckland. It's one of those actions. So anything that you as politicians are able to do to get some recognition that's one of the things that would help us streamline our processes would be very much appreciated.
And as for the targets being out of date?
Yeah, well, I might get Dave to just briefly talk through the process he's following now, but look, fundamentally we do try and use the long-term plan as the key setter of those targets and the metrics, and use the annual plan budgeting process as a small iteration changes to those. We do try and use that 10-year program as the definitive version. But look, in hindsight, yeah, we should have addressed some of these, we should have looked at those, and maybe just very briefly, if David just mentioned what we're doing going forward.
Yeah, so currently we're working through with the business and actually local boards too to look at the performance measures to try and get a better set for the next LTP period. So we're running through a program of work which is looking at the Auckland Plan outcomes that have that are going to be agreed by councillors, and then using some logic to link those to what we actually do down to our levels of service, so revising those levels of service statements to make them a little bit clearer to what we actually deliver, and then the associated performance measures. And that way we'll be able to monitor more effectively how what we do leads to what we're trying to achieve. As part of that, there will be a look at the targets as well, and the message that I'm giving out is that we need to set targets which we are confident we can achieve with the level of funding set out in the LTP. So to me, the LTP is not about stretch targets, it's about what we can confidently deliver. And that's really important because then it gives you as decision makers the ability to think about resourcing attached to that measured performance moving forward. So that review is underway. It's a big piece of work. At the moment, it's going through local boards in terms of their local measures to get their feedback, and the business is pretty engaged with that right now too.
Councillor Philippine.
Thank you, Chair. Penny, you mentioned mid-senior planners that you're targeting. Now the junior planners, what's the period for junior to get into that mid to senior range? What is that? Is that a 2-year step process, a 1-year step process? I mean, like building capacity within is one good way of doing it. So that's one question. I've got two others, and I will be very, very quick, Chair.
So we do have what's called a competency framework to ensure that planners have a career path to become intermediates and seniors, and I would anticipate that a planner becoming an intermediate planner would take approximately 2 years, and then a senior from starting would be 5, 6, 7 years.
Okay. And Penny, I just wanted to sort of, over the last 6 years, the planning department, especially now that you're the lead for that, it has been identified as an issue, and it's been identified for a few years now. And so, I'm just so glad that now people are actually realising around this table that it has been an issue, and there has been work to try and to alleviate that. But the ones that have left to better jobs, whether it be around the salary that His Worship the Mayor sort of mentioned and you answered, or whether it be around the cost of living in Auckland, I have a question around exit interviews from staff who have left, as in planners. I'll be interested, and I may be overstepping my mark through you, Chair, around moving into the operational space here. But I'll be interested to find out the reasons they have left. I don't know whether there's some it's because of the lack of money that is offered for the job they do. Is it, I'd just be really interested, so I don't know whether that can be done.
I mean, Ian can talk a bit more specifically, but I think it's a range of reasons, Councillor. I think these days our young people are of the mindset that, they turn over jobs on a regular basis. That's just part of the millennial approach to work these days. Some go because they are offered salary packages that local government can't offer them. And that's, if you join us, you can go and work in our Brisbane office, or you can go and work in the South Island. Obviously, that's not something we can deal with. Some go for lifestyle choices. Some leave to have families. It's a whole range of issues. What we have done through the restructure, though, is to really recognise that we need to give our staff more interesting work. There has been a tendency in the last few years to give the more complicated resource consents out to consultants, and that in itself has led for some staff to leave to become a consultant. So we've changed that model round to say it's the more complicated consents, the interesting ones will stay in-house. If we need to use consultants for a resourcing reason, for an overflow reason, they will get the more mundane things. And Ian has put in place that if you leave us to be a consultant, we won't use you for a year. Because that stops that behaviour of I can leave the council, become a consultant, and then come back and work for council. Yeah.
I'm glad that's my last question now, Chair, and it's around the consulting or consultancy. So at what stage would you end up coming back to governing body or finance and performance to say, look, we've tried, we can't fill the vacancies that are currently there, we will have to go out to consultancy companies to do the work, and this is what's going to cost?
Oh, look, I don't think if we need to ask for any more money to do that, because if we can't fill the vacancies, then we will be obviously giving them the money set aside for salaries for those vacancies up or shifting it to consultancy spend. It's not about asking you for any more money, no.
Yeah. Look, I wish you luck, I really do. And if there is anything that this governing body or councillors and independent multi-statutory board members of this particular committee should do, what will that be? Well, hold on, just ask the question. What would that be, Penny?
I'll encourage your grandchildren and nieces and nephews to become planners or building inspectors.
Yeah.
That might not be a short-term answer.
Okay, I'll leave it then.
Get the cost of housing down in Auckland. Okay, now look, I've got Councillor Walker and then Councillor Kidbert. We'll appreciate if we could finish by then. So, Councillor Walker.
I'm really concerned that at this issue, Mr. Chair. I only know often from the people that approach me that tell me the direct experience they're having across resource consents and building consents that this is a massive problem. And almost without exception, everybody that I speak to that is in that space is having what they regard as very severe problems. So I really think that we need to escalate this issue. Obviously, it goes to Auckland's ability to build the number of homes and apartments. I'm really concerned about the quality of those homes because, again, the anecdotal evidence I get from people in the building industry is that quality is going down, and some of that is due to people, immigrants and others that are building homes. And I think that we've got a train that's heading to us that sure involves leaky homes, but it involves many, many substandard buildings that are being built. So how can we escalate this? I would suggest that there needs to be a much more open collaboration with the sector, with others. We've got an urban design panel. I really think we need some people outside of council in the tent. This obviously goes to an issue that involves government and the ability of New Zealand Inc. to deliver on homes and quality homes. It may be that we need to look at exercises where we've got virtual assistance from people in the planning and building sector overseas. They don't necessarily have to live in New Zealand. What are all the things that we can do to get on top of this issue? So I am saying as a councillor that this is an issue that I consider warrants much more attention, much more visibility and transparency to us and the public of Auckland as a whole.
I think Penny has answered, or given the best possible answers at this stage on a number of things, and I'm sure the Mayor is listening, and that will be things will be being telegraphed to the Minister of Housing as to it ain't going to be easy to build a whole lot of houses, you know, that are just going to pop up. So, Penny, is there anything you'd like to just briefly add to respond to Councillor Walker?
I mean, we're very much aware of there's a role we need to play in improving the consenting process. The industry also has to play that role, and one of the things that we have been working with them on, and the good players in the industry agree with it, is that they have to lodge quality applications. And the problem we've done in the past is we've accepted poor quality applications, which have meant then staff have spent a lot of time trying to get the information to make them quality. So while we're very acutely aware of the things we need to do to improve, we are also expecting and asking the industry to improve their performance in terms of quality applications. So we are working closely with the industry to do that.
And just by the way, do we penalise and charge people for poor quality applications?
So from October this year, we have been rejecting them. Where in the past we would have accepted an incomplete application and then received it, put it on hold, and then had staff chasing to get the information. We have sent out the message that we will reject it. That has meant that myself and Stephen have received quite a lot of emails about people complaining that their consents have been rejected for information that is lacking, but that's the only way we're going to change behaviour.
Yep. Councillor Cooper,
just
to wrap
quickly,
it up.
I mean, one of the things I think I'd comment on is yesterday we were looking at limiting numbers of use of consultants. So I think we have to be very careful around our expectations around that, because as Mrs. Pirrott has said, if we can't get the staff, we're going to have to use them. So I was pleased to see there was a kind of an exception around this area, and I think we will have to, in the interim time until we get everything up and running properly and we get over this hump, and the kind of, also we don't know what's coming in a lot of ways here around the government's expectations in terms of their building, apparently a lot of houses and all these sorts of issues. We are going to have to be understanding in that to actually get this. I don't think we can be waving a big stick over this department. And I've got every faith in Mrs. Pirrett's leadership, that she is a prudent and wise woman and as frugal as possible. The other issue too is that we do really have to get that message out, that if we've got, we tend to have a attitude in New Zealand, which is, we're quite well known for, and we kind of like it, is, oh, she'll be right, mate, whatever, oh, just let's have a beer, sit down and have a beer about this and don't worry about the rules. And, we cannot do that anymore. And we've seen, problems over the years with poor quality builds, and we always end up picking up the pieces. And if we say you've got to do better, people say that we're, terrible bureaucrats and we're nitpicking and all of that. But actually we are the ones that take the heat when things go wrong. And so I also hope that, and all governments do it, there should be comity between different bodies, but there often isn't. There's criticism around, different governing bodies, government, local government, but, we shouldn't really be able to tolerate criticism from governments around our performance when we're doing our very best, and we're a creature of their legislation quite often. So if the Mayor can go back and, explain this, so we need to be in a partnership, and I think Sir Brian's comments before about collaboration are much better than in antagonistic relationships. So I'm really got a lot of confidence in this unit, but we all have to understand that we can't be demanding stuff to make us look good if we haven't got the tools to do that. So that's just my last comment. Thank you.
Right, well, on that positive note, Penny, wise, prudent, frugal.
She is, and very clever
And
as
Ian,
well.
thank you, Ian, thank you.
Loyal.
Thank you, David. I will put this motion, which is in front of us. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Now, I'm sorry to the next presenters, but we're going to have a 5-minute break. It's called Health and Safety, I believe. So, 1:45, guys, you've got 6 minutes. Please be at the table, and Brian and Margaret and Ravine will be at the table as well.